Sometimes the silence hurts more than rejection, not because you need words to survive, but because you deserve honesty. You replay conversations, you analyze pauses, you wonder why he shows something, but never says it. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. Men don't open up when they're pressured. They open up when they feel something they can't escape. If you want him to finally tell you how he feels, you don't chase the truth, you become undeniable to it. Let me show you how. Stop chasing clarity, start embodying it, because the truth is, the moment you start running after answers, you quietly tell the world you don't trust yourself to survive without them. And that changes the energy of everything. Think about how many times you've replayed a message in your head, how many times you've waited for a reply, checked the phone, reread old conversations, searched for hidden meaning in a simple pause. Not because you're weak, but because you care. Because uncertainty feels heavy when your heart is involved. But here's the part nobody prepares you for. Clarity doesn't come from asking the right question at the right time. It comes from becoming someone who no longer needs to ask. When you chase clarity, you place your emotional balance in someone else's hands. You wait for their words to calm you, their tone to reassure you, their confession to validate what you already feel. And without realizing it, you shrink, not visibly, not dramatically, just enough that they sense it, just enough that the dynamic shifts. Human beings respond to energy long before they respond to language. Long before words, the nervous system decides whether something feels safe, urgent, pressured, or free. When you keep asking, explaining, hinting, or hoping they'll finally get it, your energy starts to carry urgency. And urgency, even when it comes from love, feels like pressure. Pressure closes people. It doesn't open them. Think about your own life. Think about a moment when someone demanded an emotional answer from you before you were ready. Maybe they wanted reassurance. Maybe they wanted a decision. Maybe they wanted certainty right now. Even if you cared, something inside you probably resisted. You might have pulled back. You might have gone quiet. You might have felt overwhelmed instead of connected. That's not cruelty. That's human nature. So when you stop chasing clarity, you're not giving up. You're doing something far more powerful. You're choosing self-trust over emotional bargaining. Embodying clarity means your actions already answer the questions you used to ask out loud. It means your boundaries are quiet but firm. It means you don't over-explain your feelings just to be understood. You feel them fully, you honor them privately, and you express them calmly when it matters. There's a noticeable difference between someone who wants to be chosen and someone who has already chosen themselves. People sense it immediately. When you embody clarity, you no longer rush conversations toward outcomes. You let them unfold. You're present but not attached to forcing a result. And that calm presence changes the emotional temperature of the room. Suddenly you're not asking, "Where is this going?" Your energy says, "I know where I'm going." You're either aligned with that or you're not. That kind of energy does something interesting. It removes fear from the interaction. Not your fear, theirs. Because when someone realizes you're not emotionally dependent on their response, they feel freer to tell the truth. There's less risk, less pressure, less performance, and more honesty. A lot of men, especially, grow up learning that emotions are problems to be solved, not experiences to be shared. They're taught to stay composed, to stay in control, to avoid vulnerability unless they're absolutely sure it's safe. When they feel someone pulling clarity out of them, they don't interpret it as intimacy. They interpret it as expectation, and expectations feel heavy when you're not ready. But when you embody clarity, you remove that weight. You stop asking, "Do you like me?" And you start asking yourself, "Do I like the way I'm being treated?" You stop waiting for reassurance, and you start noticing patterns. You stop needing words to confirm feelings, and you start trusting what actions already show. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you grounded. Grounded people don't rush emotional timelines. They don't chase explanations. They don't collapse into silence either. They simply live in alignment with their values, and that alignment is felt. There's a quiet confidence in someone who can sit with uncertainty without panicking, someone who doesn't rush to fill every gap with questions, someone who understands that if something is real, it won't disappear just because you gave it space. That confidence is disarming. When you embody clarity, conversations change, the tone shifts. Suddenly, you're not the one seeking direction, you're the one setting the pace. Not through control, but through self-respect. And here's something subtle but important: clarity isn't about knowing the future. It's about knowing yourself in the present. Knowing what you're available for, knowing what you won't tolerate, knowing when something feels aligned and when it doesn't. When you're clear with yourself, you don't need someone else to explain your worth back to you. You don't need emotional promises to feel secure. You don't need constant affirmation to stay steady, and that steadiness creates safety. People open up around those who feel emotionally self-contained, not closed, not distant, just whole. When you stop chasing clarity, you also stop negotiating with potential. You stop trying to convince someone to meet you where you already stand. And that's often the moment they finally see you clearly, because clarity isn't loud, it doesn't argue, it doesn't plead, it doesn't demand to be understood. It simply exists. And when someone stands in front of that kind of presence, they're faced with a choice: rise to it with honesty or fall away from it with silence. Either way, you get your answer without ever asking. That's the shift. You don't become less caring, you become less fragmented. You gather your energy back from all the places you scattered it looking for reassurance. You bring it home, and once it's home, it's powerful, because the most compelling thing you can ever communicate to another human being is this: I trust myself. And when you do, the world responds differently. Create emotional safety, not emotional demands. Because most people don't stay silent because they have nothing to say. They stay silent because they don't feel safe enough to say it. And that difference changes everything. Think about how many times you've wanted someone to open up, to finally tell you what's really going on inside them. You didn't want a perfect speech. You didn't need poetic words. You just wanted honesty. You wanted truth without guessing. But instead, you felt distance, evasion, half answers. And the more you leaned in, the more they seemed to pull away. That moment hurts because it feels personal. It feels like rejection. But often, it isn't about a lack of feeling. It's about a lack of safety. From a young age, many men learn that emotions are something you control, not something you share. They're praised for staying strong, staying quiet, staying composed. Vulnerability isn't framed as connection, it's framed as risk. So when feelings run deep, the instinct isn't to speak. The instinct is to protect. Protection doesn't look dramatic. It looks like jokes instead of answers. It looks like changing the subject. It looks like being present but not fully exposed. And when someone responds to that protection with pressure, questions, expectations, urgency, it reinforces the fear. Emotional demands sound reasonable on the surface. Just tell me how you feel. I deserve clarity. We need to talk. But underneath those words is an unspoken message: say the right thing right now, or something will break. And when someone feels like their honesty might cost them peace, they choose silence. Emotional safety works differently. It doesn't rush. It doesn't corner. It doesn't threaten consequences for truth. It creates a space where nothing bad happens if the answer isn't perfect. Think about the people in your life you open up to effortlessly. You don't rehearse with them. You don't fear judgment. You don't brace yourself for a reaction. You just speak. Not because they ask the right questions, but because you trust their presence. That trust doesn't come from words. It comes from consistency, calm, emotional regulation. When you create emotional safety, your tone stays steady even when the conversation is heavy. Your body language stays open even when you're disappointed. Your energy says, I can handle the truth, whatever it is. That's rare. And people respond to rare. There's a reason therapists focus more on creating a safe environment than on forcing breakthroughs. Real breakthroughs happen when the nervous system relaxes, when the body no longer feels threatened, the truth rises naturally. The same thing happens in relationships. When you demand emotions, you activate defense. When you offer safety, you invite vulnerability. This doesn't mean suppressing your needs. It means expressing them without emotional force. There's a quiet strength in saying how you feel without attaching urgency to the response, in sharing your experience without expecting it to be fixed immediately. Safety sounds like this. This is how I feel, and I'm okay sitting with it. Not, this is how I feel, and I need you to resolve it right now. That difference changes the entire dynamic. Real life shows this again and again. There are countless stories of people who stopped pushing for answers and focused instead on becoming emotionally grounded. They didn't withdraw in silence or play games. They simply regulated their emotions. They stopped reacting to every pause. They allowed space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. The other person spoke. Not because they were chased, but because they felt calm enough to face their own feelings. When someone senses that their honesty won't be punished, won't lead to arguments, emotional overload, or guilt, they become more willing to be real. Emotional safety also means allowing incomplete answers. Allowing someone to say, I don't know yet, without taking it as rejection. Allowing confusion to exist without demanding immediate clarity. That's difficult, because uncertainty triggers fear. The mind wants resolution. But emotional maturity understands that not all truths arrive on schedule. Safety is patience without resentment. It's staying present without keeping score. It's listening without planning a response. And most importantly, it's being responsible for your own emotional state instead of handing that responsibility to someone else. When you create emotional safety, you stop using emotions as leverage. You don't cry to be understood. You don't get angry to be heard. You don't withdraw to provoke a reaction. You remain steady. That steadiness is magnetic. People open up around those who don't collapse when emotions surface, around those who don't make feelings feel dangerous. There's a quiet moment that happens when someone realizes, I can be honest here. It's not dramatic, it's subtle, a deeper breath, a longer pause, a softer tone, and then truth. But here's the part many people misunderstand. Creating emotional safety doesn't guarantee the answer you want. It guarantees the answer you need. Sometimes the truth is connection. Sometimes it's misalignment. But both are better than confusion. Emotional demands keep you stuck in guessing. Emotional safety gives you clarity without force. And there's strength in knowing that you can hear any truth and remain whole. That strength changes how people show up around you. Because when you stop demanding emotions and start holding space for them, you become someone people trust with their real selves. And in that space, honesty finally feels possible. Let your silence speak louder than your words. Not the silence that comes from fear, not the silence that hides pain or waits to be rescued, but the kind of silence that comes from self-trust, from emotional strength, from knowing you don't need to explain yourself into being valued. Most people are afraid of silence because it feels like loss of control. When the conversation stops, the mind fills the gap with stories, doubt creeps in, questions grow louder. You start wondering if you said the wrong thing, if you should say more, if you should fix something before it slips away. So you speak, you explain, you send one more message, you try to clarify what you meant, how you felt, why it mattered. And in doing so, you give away the very power you're trying to hold. Silence, when it's intentional, isn't emptiness. It's space, and space reveals truth. Think about the moments in your life when silence changed everything. A pause in an argument that stopped it from turning cruel. A moment of quiet that made someone finally speak honestly. A space between words where you realized something wasn't aligned anymore. Silence doesn't erase connection. It tests it. When you keep talking to be understood, you teach people that your peace is negotiable. That if they stay quiet long enough, you'll fill the gap for them. You'll carry the emotional weight alone. But when you allow silence to exist, something shifts. The emotional responsibility moves back where it belongs. Silence creates contrast. It separates presence from noise, and people feel that difference immediately. There's a reason silence feels uncomfortable. The human nervous system craves certainty. Words give the illusion of control. Silence removes that illusion. It forces awareness. When you stop explaining yourself, you give others the chance to notice what's missing: your energy, your availability, your emotional labor, not as punishment, as truth. This kind of silence isn't withdrawal. You're not disappearing. You're simply no longer performing emotional reassurance for someone who hasn't earned it. And that's powerful. People often confuse silence with indifference. But real indifference doesn't feel heavy. Silence does. Silence creates a mirror. It reflects back the dynamic exactly as it is. When someone cares, silence makes them lean in. They feel the shift. They feel the space. They wonder. They reflect. They reach out. When someone doesn't, silence makes that clear too. Either way, you stop guessing. There's a story that plays out again and again in real life. Someone stops sending the good morning texts, stops checking in, stops initiating conversations that go nowhere, not out of bitterness, out of self-respect, and suddenly the other person notices, not because words were exchanged, because energy changed. Neuroscience tells us that the brain pays more attention to absence than presence when something matters. When a pattern breaks, the mind searches for meaning. Silence interrupts autopilot. Your silence says, "I'm no longer chasing understanding. I trust you to meet me where I stand. I value my peace." That message doesn't need words. Silence also protects you. It keeps you from oversharing when you're emotional, from saying things you'll later wish you'd held back, from giving someone access to parts of you they haven't proven safe with. There's strength in pausing before reacting, in letting emotions settle before they turn into explanations. Silence gives emotions time to tell the truth. When you stop filling every space, you start hearing yourself more clearly. You notice what feels heavy, what feels forced, what feels one-sided, and clarity begins to form without confrontation. That's why silence is often mistaken for distance. In reality, it's depth. It's listening without interrupting. It's observing without judging. It's understanding without trying to control. People who are comfortable with silence are comfortable with themselves. And that comfort is magnetic. Silence doesn't beg. It doesn't argue. It doesn't plead for recognition. It simply exists. And in its existence, it asks a question no words can ask: are you willing to meet me here? Many relationships fail not because people don't care, but because one person speaks while the other listens in silence until the silence finally leaves. When you stop over-communicating, you stop carrying the connection alone. Letting silence speak means trusting that what's real will respond, and what doesn't was never meant to stay. This doesn't mean ignoring people or playing emotional games. Intentional silence is clean. There's no manipulation in it, no hidden agenda. It's simply the absence of unnecessary words. You respond when there's something true to say. You stay quiet when words would only dilute your self-respect. There's peace in that, and there's power, because when you stop chasing responses, you start receiving honesty. Not always immediately, not always in the way you expect, but in a way that frees you. Silence doesn't force answers, it allows them. And sometimes the loudest thing you can do is nothing at all. When you let your silence speak louder than your words, you stop asking to be chosen. You start standing as someone worth choosing. And the right people hear that loud and clear. Raise your standards without announcing them, because the strongest boundaries are the ones you don't need to explain. The moment you start declaring what you deserve, you often reveal how much you're hoping someone else will finally treat you better. Real standards don't ask for permission. They show up quietly in the choices you make and the things you no longer tolerate. There's a difference between saying, "I know my worth," and living in a way that proves it. Words can be repeated. Behavior can't be faked for long. Most people think raising standards means demanding more from others, more effort, more communication, more commitment. But that's not what it really is. Raising your standards means demanding more from yourself, more honesty, more self-respect, more alignment between what you feel and what you accept. You don't wake up one day and announce that you've changed. You simply stop responding to what no longer matches who you are. Think about how often people explain their boundaries because they feel guilty for having them. They over-justify, they soften the edges, they apologize for needing respect. That apology sends a message, I'm not sure I'm allowed to want this. When you truly raise your standards, that uncertainty disappears. You don't argue when someone gives you mixed signals. You observe. You don't beg for consistency. You notice its absence. You don't try to convince someone to meet you where you stand. You let them show you whether they can. That's not arrogance. That's clarity. There's a calm confidence in someone who doesn't chase treatment that should be natural. They don't threaten to leave. They don't issue ultimatums. They simply adjust their presence, and people feel that shift immediately. Raising your standards silently means you stop rewarding behavior that drains you. You stop replying instantly to messages that arrive without intention. You stop giving in spaces where effort isn't reciprocated. You stop making yourself smaller to keep someone comfortable. You don't explain the change. You embody it. There's a story many people experience without realizing what's happening. Someone starts valuing themselves more. They become less available for confusion, less tolerant of emotional inconsistency, and suddenly the dynamic changes. The other person either steps up or fades out. Both outcomes are clarity. Psychology shows that people rise to the level of behavior that's required to access something they value. When access is unlimited, effort decreases. When access is earned through respect, effort increases. This isn't manipulation, it's human nature. When you stop announcing your standards, you stop negotiating them. You no longer say, I need more effort. You stop accepting less. You no longer say, I deserve honesty. You stop engaging where honesty is absent. Your time becomes selective. Your energy becomes protected. Your emotional investment becomes intentional. That's when people start taking you seriously. There's something powerful about not reacting, about not confronting every disappointment, about letting your absence speak where words once tried to. Silence combined with standards is clarity without conflict. And here's the uncomfortable truth: raising your standards will make some people uncomfortable, not because you've changed for the worse, but because your growth highlights where they've stayed the same. Some people benefit from you having low expectations, from you being forgiving without accountability, from you explaining away their lack of effort. When you stop doing that, the dynamic breaks. That's not loss. That's alignment. Rising your standards doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it only where it's valued. It means you no longer confuse potential with reality. You don't stay because of what someone could become. You stay because of who they consistently are. And consistency is a standard many people don't realize they're failing to meet. There's a quiet dignity in walking away without drama, in choosing yourself without making a speech about it, in letting people feel the difference instead of arguing about it. Your standards become visible in how you spend your time, in who gets access to your emotional world, in how quickly you disengage from disrespect, in how calmly you say no. You don't need to say, I won't accept this anymore. You simply don't. That restraint takes strength, because explaining feels easier in the moment. Confrontation feels productive. But true self-respect doesn't need witnesses. When you raise your standards silently, you stop hoping someone will change. You start trusting yourself to leave if they don't. That trust changes your posture, your tone, your presence. People sense when they can no longer cross certain lines, not because you warned them, but because you no longer stand there when they do. And the ones who truly value you, they rise, they meet you, they adjust without being asked, because they want to, not because they're forced to. The ones who don't, they fall away, quietly, naturally, without chaos, and in that space, something opens up. Peace, self-respect, A sense of alignment that doesn't depend on external validation. Raising your standards without announcing them is choosing inner stability over external approval. It's understanding that the right people won't need convincing. They'll recognize the value without being told. And the moment you stop explaining why you deserve better, you finally start receiving it. Become the version of you that doesn't need the answer. Because needing an answer can quietly become a prison. Not a loud one, not the kind that screams or breaks things, but the kind that keeps you waiting, watching, replaying moments, measuring your worth by someone else's response. And the longer you wait, the more power you give away. Most people think they want answers because they want peace, but often they want answers because they're afraid of what it might mean if they never come. Silence feels unfinished. Uncertainty feels unbearable. So the mind looks for closure the way a tired body looks for rest. But here's the truth that takes time to accept. The answers don't create peace. Self-trust does. Think about how many times in your life you finally got an answer you thought you needed, only to realize it didn't fix the feeling. The words came, but the weight stayed, or worse, the words confused you even more, because clarity from someone else can't heal what's unsettled inside you. When you need an answer, you place your emotional stability in someone else's hands. You wait for them to decide how you should feel. You wait for their words to define the meaning of the connection, and without noticing, you stop listening to yourself. Needing an answer makes you smaller, not visibly, internally. Your attention narrows. Your focus shifts outward. You start living in anticipation instead of presence. But when you become the version of yourself that doesn't need the answer, something radical happens. You stop waiting for permission to move forward. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop chasing reassurance. There's a quiet moment of growth when you realize that not all questions deserve answers. Some exist to test whether you trust yourself enough to walk without them. Think of a time when you already knew the truth, but still wanted to hear it out loud. You felt it in your body, in the inconsistency, in the way effort faded, in the way you were left guessing, yet you stayed hoping for words to contradict what your intuition already understood. That's the moment where growth begins. When you stop asking because you already know. Becoming someone who doesn't need the answer means you no longer need someone else to validate your perception. You trust your experience. You trust what repeated behavior shows you. You trust how you feel after interactions, not just what's promised during them. This kind of self-trust isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in how you move through uncertainty without panic. You stop checking your phone compulsively. You stop rereading old messages. You stop looking for hidden meanings. Not because you don't care, but because you care about your peace more. There's a strength in being able to say, I don't know and I'm okay. That strength doesn't come from indifference. It comes from emotional maturity. People who don't need answers are not detached. They're anchored. Anchored in their values, anchored in their boundaries, anchored in their sense of self. When you're anchored, you don't drift with every change in someone else's behavior. You notice shifts, but you don't collapse into them. You respond instead of react, and that response often looks like stillness. Stillness is misunderstood. It's not inaction, it's restraint. It's choosing not to chase what isn't aligned. It's trusting that what's meant for you won't require you to abandon yourself. When you no longer need the answer, you stop bargaining with potential. You stop holding on to maybes. You stop romanticizing uncertainty. You start asking better questions, not to them, but to yourself. How do I feel here? Am I calm or constantly anxious? Am I growing or just waiting? Those questions don't require external answers. They require honesty. And honesty has a way of simplifying things. Becoming the version of you that doesn't need the answer also frees the other person. Without pressure, without expectation, they can show up as they are. And when they do, you see them clearly without projection, without hope filling in the gaps. Sometimes, when you stop needing the answer, it finally comes. not because you demanded it, but because the weight of expectation is gone. Truth flows more easily when it's not being pulled out. Other times, it never comes, and you move on anyway, not with bitterness, with acceptance, because you've learned that your life doesn't pause waiting for someone else's readiness. There's something deeply attractive about a person who doesn't need answers to feel whole. Their presence is calm. Their reactions are measured. Their energy isn't scattered. They don't chase. They don't cling. They don't disappear either. They remain. And in that grounded state, they attract relationships that are built on clarity, not confusion, on choice, not anxiety. This version of you doesn't rush endings or beg for beginnings. You understand that what's real will meet you in the middle, and what doesn't was never meant to stay. You stop fearing loss because you're no longer abandoning yourself to keep someone else. And that's the shift. When you don't need the answer, you stop giving your power to silence. You stop letting uncertainty define your worth. You stop living in emotional suspense. You trust yourself to walk forward with or without explanations. And that trust becomes your peace. You don't force feelings out of someone. You inspire them. You don't chase honesty. You become a space where honesty feels safe. And when you do chase, he won't just tell you how he feels. He'll feel it clearly for the first time himself. Stay grounded, stay true, and never forget the right words always come when you stop begging for them.